This talk was recorded during Goldsmiths Fair 2020. Goldsmiths Fair is a unique selling event showcasing the work of a selection of some of the most talented, established and emerging fine jewellers and contemporary silversmiths creating and making in the UK today. Next year's fair will run from the 28th of September to the 10th of October 2021. Until then, you can browse the makers from this year's fair and read stories about them and their work at goldsmithsfair.co.uk.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's Goldsmiths Fair panel discussion. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our lead panellist tonight. Melanie Eddy is a key academic at Central St Martin's and a director of the Association for Contemporary Jewellery. She is involved in many projects relating to her field, from sector development, research, writing, exhibition installation and curation. Most recently, she co-founded the Jewellery Futures Fund to support Black students into careers in the jewellery industry. Melanie has a London studio based in the Goldsmith Centre in London. She specialises in a bespoke service, mostly working with customer-focused private commissions. I'm going to leave Melanie to introduce the rest of the panel. So welcome, Melanie.
Hello. So I'm going to introduce our panelists today. So I'd like to introduce Vania Leles of VanLeles Diamonds. Former runway model, Vania was inspired to enter the fine jewelry space upon feeling she saw little representation of the people and countries where these materials are sourced at the helms of brands and as celebrated designers. After graduating from the Gemological Institute of America and spending over a decade working for Graf de Beers and Sotheby's, she launched her own brand in 2011 with an unwavering commitment to ethical sourcing of gemstones and precious metals. And with an atelier in London's Bond Street, hers is the first African fine jewelry house. So Ryan Nelson of Ryan Nelson London. Jewelry came early to Ryan, his father being a jeweler as well. A freeman of the Goldsmiths Company, after completing a 5-year apprenticeship with David Laws, Ryan is stepping from behind the scenes into the spotlight with his own company launched in 2013, specializing in bespoke jewelry and expanding into a fine jewelry range. Ndidi Ekubia. Ndidi almost needs no introduction, but I shall try in brief to make an adequate one. She is an RCA graduate and silversmith of great acclaim, a member of the livery at the Goldsmiths Company. Her works, instantly arresting and recognizable, grace a number of important public collections, including the Vania and the Ashmolean Museum. In 2017, she was awarded an MBE for services to silversmithing. Shola Branson, the head of an emerging brand established in 2017 that kept coming onto my radar. Shola centers efforts with his pieces on a playful combination of the ancient and the divine, explored through timeless, bold silhouettes. He brings his experience in the world of fashion into fine jewelry in refreshing ways. And Shivani Patel, designer and goldsmith Shivani creates modern fine jewelry in recycled gold, best known for its minimalist architectural and sculptural qualities. A graduate of the School of Jewelry in Birmingham, Shivani has continued to shine since graduation, showing at a number of prestigious exhibitions and receiving awards, including from the Goldsmiths Company and the Arts Council, amongst others. So I hope you enjoy this evening in conversation. Thank you for joining us this evening. There's an incredible breadth of talent and experiences amongst us tonight. We all work on pieces of high value, which are entrusted to our safekeeping during their development, and then passed on to individuals and families to be cherished and enjoyed for generations to come. Our heritage, backgrounds, and origins span archipelagos and continents from Africa, South Asia, and the Caribbean to Middle England and our capital here in London. I myself came to the UK over 16 years ago now with an open heart and boundless enthusiasm to further my skills in what I then saw as a mecca of jewelry craftsmanship. Some of us were introduced to our trades in our early years, others by moving sideways, coming to them from other disciplines later in life. A few months ago, when running one morning on a run into Harton Garden to pick up supplies, I paid a little more attention to the people I encountered and saw on my errand. Perhaps I was more tuned in, having been away from the workshop for some months, as I had been researching for an article on diversity in our trade, or maybe I was searching, keen to counter the narrative, often appearing in the press on social media and solidified on various industry platforms that almost erases the existence of many of us of color operating and excelling in this industry. I saw faces of all colors in every capacity, and I thought, this is a true reflection of our industry. The nature of our business is that the pieces we create often take all of the spotlight, and rightly so. For those longtime fans of Goldsmiths Fair and those new to the fair through this digital platform, one of the exciting elements of the fair is getting to meet and know the makers and designers of these beautiful pieces. Tonight, we seek to bring you a little of that magic, and we hope you will enjoy getting to know us. We offer unique perspective in our disciplines and are sharing a few insights into our choices and approaches in the design and craft of beautiful, fresh, and exciting pieces for you and your home. So I'm going to start with my first question to Vania, if she's ready. So Vania, your gem-rich collections are based around the countries in Africa where the gems featured are sourced. I like to talk about the role of provenance in your work, and of course, how that links to authenticity as a brand. It was important for you to honor the communities and countries where the gems for your jewelry are sourced. Please give us some insight into your approach to provenance and how that is an important aspect of VanLeles diamonds.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for having me today. Well, really, when I decided to go into fine jewelry was having been born and raised in West Africa, Guinea-Bissau, and I didn't link the connection about our natural resources, mainly like diamonds and gold. You know, I always associated them with very bad, with bad things. So I have, growing up where the gemstones are unearthed and not linking how beautiful they can be and how much wealth they can bring to a city, to a population, to a community. When I say wealth, it's not just wealth in many ways. It's wealth in knowledge, it's wealth in craft, it's wealth in furthering your life. So I had to be in my early 20s, modeling in New York, to come upon this beautiful, we're shooting a table beautiful, full of diamonds and jewelry from all the brands you would find on Bond Street. I was mesmerized. And what struck me was the guy was like, how come you're so surprised? You come from Africa and you didn't know that. I said, no, I did not know that. And then I did a bit of research and you find out like entire cities like Antwerp were built on Africans' diamonds. The employment they created for generations and generations, the skills they transfer from generation. And I remember feeling like, okay, I will walk down Fifth Avenue, I will walk down any of these jewelry quarters, I will find some Africans who could just give me an insight, a tip. I walked up and down Fifth Avenue, didn't see anyone. Went to the diamond, anyone who looked like me, or any house that had a representation that, or the lead designer or lead buyer or gemologist that looked like me coming from the continent. It was so very generational and very segmented industry. I walked down the diamond district. I said, okay, am I gonna find some diamond dealers? Yet to my surprise, I did not. So I was like, how come probably 75% of what exists in fine jewelry comes from the continent in Africa? There is no representation. So that was my first bug. I remember speaking to my mom saying, you know, all these things, blah, 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 come from the continent and then there's no representation. Why is that? So I want to start my own jewelry company and call it African Diamonds. My mother wisely told me, why don't you give yourself 10 years, go and search and work and study in the industry, and then you realize why, without being too political about it. I'm very passionate about this subject, especially because, you know, after working in the industry, I visited fairs, I visited jewelry exhibitions, I walk into stores, I work for companies that would proudly say Canadian diamonds, Russian diamonds, Colombian emeralds, Burma rubies, and yet there was no mention of African gemstones ever. You know, Mozambican has all the color of tourmalines and rubies in the world, but people just mention Brazilian rubies and Brazilian aquamarines and color stones, not Mozambican. The same thing with emeralds. Zambian emeralds have been around for 400 years and they could be as beautiful as Colombian emeralds if you compare, you know, rock by rock, of the same quality. So all of this was building up the unfairness of the system. Obviously, is a structure being put in place for centuries. It's not something I'm able to break, unfortunately. But it gave me food for thought, because things are not changing on the ground. And I travel extensively. After starting my own company, I travel extensively across the continent, especially now when well, this year alone, I've been to Congo, I've been to Namibia, I've been to Rwanda. So you see why it changes. If the consumers don't know where the gemstones come from, we don't shine a spotlight where the gemstones come from, we're not going to see changes on the ground, because whoever is mining there don't relate. They don't, essentially don't care as much. Anyway, I don't want to take too much time.
No, I was thinking you're really explicit about it.
Yeah, this is a very long answer for me, because I'm so very passionate. I'm so very passionate about it. So I decided to launch collections, sourcing gemstones from specific African countries, and proudly name it, Zambian emeralds. My Legends of Africa, I use Zambian emeralds, that I source in Lusaka, in the continent, in the country, and proudly shout. I remember my PR at the time was like, Vani, you should not mention too much the origins of your gemstones. I said, why not? That's where they come from. This is where everybody trades and buys and sells. The same thing with rubies. I proudly mention all my rubelites and rubies and Paribas come from the Mozambique. So I'm proud to say that not only we're promoting these countries, we're promoting gemstones, perhaps step by step, more people will feel aligned, will want to ask more questions, but at least it's out there. So
start to challenge
one of the main reasons, obviously I fell in love with it. I do a lot of more things in the jewelry industry, but is a cornerstone of my branding, of my heritage. This is why I think it's so authenticity matters. And authenticity can only be linked if you are doing things are genuinely, true.
And for you, it even ties into the design as well, like not just the names, like you talk about your inspiration is of place and related to the connections for each collection is tied to the inspirations of the architecture, or whether it's flora, or whether it's like, Kilimanjaro, for example, all of them tied to these different places on the continent where things are sourced, which is really interesting.
Exactly. My Enchanted Garden collection, for instance, a lot of people think, oh, Vania does African jewelry, and they think immediately it's very tribal, it's very hard, and I'm using wood. No, I'm using all the materials, all of the fine jewelry I'm using, because that's where they go in source. So I took the shape of our Enchanted Garden cuff earrings from an African print fabric, and that the shape lend itself beautiful for a cuff earrings, and it became one of us.
I remember seeing some of your design working and your mood boards. Yeah.
So it's very modern, it's very contemporary, it's very luxurious. It is fine jewelry at its finest, if you ask me.
Thank you very much. I think is Ndidi. I was going to go into Ndidi. Are you there? I think she's not quite there. But I'm
here. Sorry.
Oh, are you?
I am here.
Because it was going to be a segue into basically with Vania's work and with your work, there's a real like kind of vibrancy and fluidity and movement to the pieces. And with Vania, obviously, she's very explicit about that in terms of how she communicates around the collections. But from my conversations with you, Ndidi, you've said how, like, I know that it impacts, like, it's very much a link to your work. But what I wanted to talk to you mostly about with this one question is, I would imagine for you, entering the silversmithing world might have been quite isolating early on in your career.
Yeah.
So a little bit about, and then because you talked a little bit about kind of how you had outreach work and like you literally were taking silver kind of to the people, and that how that helped to strengthen your vision and helped you to kind of find your voice. But did you feel like you kind of found your voice as you established your practice, as a maker of excellence?
Definitely. I mean, at the time, it is quite a long time ago now, but at the beginning, it was a case of I used to take my tools, hammers, wood, and travel to libraries, museums, do a lot of sort of like demos and stuff like that, and just try and, because people didn't know about the making side of the silversmithing. And so I just wanted to show people what could be done and how noisy it was, the sort of hammers. They didn't believe that I was making silverware out of flat pieces of material and hammering these pieces and things. And some of the pieces that were quite big. So it was like, how do you explain to somebody that that's made with a hammer and not a machine, and sort of the textures and the things. So for me, at the beginning, I was like, oh gosh, I want everybody to be able to buy my work, everybody's got to be able to afford to buy so I used to make spoons and all sorts of different little things and all sorts of different materials and stuff. And like Open Studios was a great access to everyone, because every walks of life used to come into the Open Studios, whether it's students, whether it's people in the community, or whether it's people who wanted to buy the silverware. And so it was just a case of really showing everybody what can be done. They understand jewelry, because obviously you can wear that and you can walk around with that, but with silverware, it was very different. Yeah. So I wouldn't use the word isolating, because I was always part of a community of makers. Yeah. And you're talking from people who made steel, furniture, ceramics, glass, and all sorts. And even, we were in contact with like computer guys and design, different, graphic design and stuff like that. So it wasn't isolated, but I did stick out a lot.
But I think it's cool that you kind of took that, like you kind of took that in a way and then like found your own path, because you were taking silver into places where it wasn't like, people were used to silver being in like on display in like a museum or a grand house, or like, say like National Trust property or something like that. But like, I don't think people normally are used to seeing a silversmith actually raise silver in like a library or a cafe or something like that, which is pretty awesome.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a case of people see silver objects in a case, and I was like, oh my gosh, pick it up. It does this, drink out of it, throw food in it, and you can use it to dish food up, and it's got such a texture, and I wanted people to actually pick it up and use it. And I think so. And I was also, when I was studying, it was drilled into me that it had to be functional. So everything I make has a function. It's not just decorative. So that was my access to people. And I don't know, the tools was my main thing. I love hammers and I love steel shapes, and I wouldn't buy shoes. I would buy hammers and my steel stakes and the rest of it. And that was my focus. And so, it was, I totally enjoyed it, as you all do, making. It was an expression of myself and the things I saw when I was living in London. And, so that was it really.
And do you think from actually getting that engagement, do you think it influenced your, like, how you developed your practice, or was it just kind of like something that fed your practice or fed you as a maker?
It definitely fed my practice. The sort of people talking conversations, talking about my life and where I was from, listening to people where they were from and their connection to silver in many different ways. It was really good to be able to know what to make next. I never kind of, I made what I wanted to make. I didn't really think about what else was going on, really. And obviously my skills were limited. I didn't do an apprenticeship, so I only knew how to make things in a certain way, and it still is that case, you know. I go to other people to help me make different things and stuff like that. So yeah, absolutely, people are still feeding the way I make things, and I've moved up north to Manchester, where I grew up, and so it's such a different place. It's crazy, actually, you know, from being in London to being in Manchester. So I think my work's going to change again. And
I was going to say, and how has like the local community found that of you moving up there?
I haven't had an opportunity to.
Yeah, just the early days, yeah.
Not really, not yet. We've not been here for very long. We're still kind of settling.
Yeah,
but I don't know. It's got a big roughness to it. Let's put it that way. And so I'm thinking, how am I gonna? Yeah, I'd like to get back to showing the community exactly what can be done. And I think it's quite important for young people to see that, definitely, you know, life can go many different ways. Even if you don't do a creative thing, you can have access to it in many different ways. I think lockdown has actually helped people engage with creativity in many different ways.
As well, like what Vania said, when she was first interested, she went to see if she could find people that she could talk to, you know, and she didn't see people that like looked like her, or like she didn't like have people to identify with. So I think if you're out there and anybody wants to study silversmithing and they get to see you, that it's going to be a positive for them, isn't it? They're going to be like, oh, definitely. Wow, like this is possible for me. You know, it's I think it's really helpful. And I think it's really important to have exemplars out there for people who are interested in entering this industry.
Definitely. I mean, for me, my first experience was in school. I just made a little copper thing. It was like it wasn't even jewelry. It was like I soldered two bits together, and it looked like a peas and pod and things like that. And then later on, I was, you know, saw more of it. And so I don't know. Yeah, if young people see that they can have access to these things, maybe you know, we'll have more creatives.
Yeah, and see people thriving in it, which is always great, isn't it? Like,
absolutely, you know. That's always important stuff.
So I'm gonna go on to Ryan. So, because Ryan, I guess in some ways was lucky in that he had a parent who was a jeweler. So. So that maybe, to some extent, kind of like was a little bit of an early introduction. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your kind of choices and your decisions in terms of launching your business and your thoughts around that. And one thing that I think a lot of us would think is a really simple thing. So, for example, putting your face to your business might seem like a pretty simple, straightforward thing. But we know there's some complexity to this choice as business owners of color. So historically, but also still where we are today. So Ryan, when you established your own brand and moved essentially from behind the scenes and being somewhat anonymous in terms of your association with the objects that you were creating into the spotlight, you explicitly put yourself out in front. Can you talk a little bit about why it was important to you that the people knew the man behind Ryan Nelson London?
Sure. So for me, it's extremely important for people to know the man behind the name and the work that we produce. For many years, as craftsmen and women, we're hidden behind the scenes, creating these incredible pieces, but never really getting the credit or acknowledgement for being the ones that actually create them. And then, you know, obviously we've spoken a little bit in detail about that, Melanie. So as one of the only few jewelers of color coming through the apprenticeship scheme, when I did, I felt it was important to not only strive to be one of the best coming through, but also be proud of who I am, what I am, and make sure that everybody knew that, you know? So those were my early days. And although back then I didn't fully appreciate the complexity of race within the industry, as I've grown as a person and as a craftsman, it's become more prevalent and important to me to show the man behind the work. You know, so with everything that's been highlighted recently in the news, it's obviously been going on for many, many years. And it's really got me thinking about the opportunities that young people generally, but more specifically people of color. And so one of the main reasons I believe it's important to see the face behind the brand is to, I guess, set a good positive example to those aspiring kids and also show them that being successful in this industry is something that's definitely attainable, no matter where you're from or what your ethnicity is. So I guess to cap it off, when you're trying to make your way in the industry or career, you always look ahead at the people that, you know, can inspire you, or, you know, like where you're trying to aim at, you know. And if you can't see anyone that either looks like you or comes from that same background as you, or has anything in common with the heritage or anything like that, then it can be really demoralizing, you know, and also confusing in some ways. So I think that's why, for me, it's important to show the man and the face and the person behind the brand. Yeah.
And I think as well, it's really important as well to talk about how success is defined. I mean, I think we might get onto something like this a bit later, but I think like oftentimes there's a lot of us that are doing really well and have success with our practices and our businesses, but we aren't always necessarily like, you know, out in front in terms of, you know, what's happening with publicity. But that doesn't mean that we're not successful and we aren't doing really amazing work. So I think that's also something to think about as well in regards to representation. So I'd like to come now on to Shola, if he's there.
Hi.
Are you ready, Shola?
Yeah.
So one thing I think was quite interesting that's kind of come out. So the thing that's been nice about preparing for this talk is that I've gotten to know all of you and chat with you kind of before this evening. And Shola, what I'd like to do is I'd like to discuss kind of with you this idea of kind of democratization of luxury and opening up our definitions of luxury and what that looks like. So, you know, who has access to luxurious pieces, and this is something that Ndidi talked a little bit about in regards to silver and where we see silver and how we conceive of silver objects and vessels. So can you share a little bit about your insights into this and into how you created your aesthetic, why the unisex kind of vibe to the Shola Branson brand is really important for you and your intentions for your work?
Yeah, sure. So to answer like the second half of your question first, so my aesthetic is kind of a combination between the ancient and the contemporary. So trying to work around that kind of theme. And in regards to gender, I just think as a society, we're moving more towards a place where gender archetypes and just gender in general is becoming less important. Yeah, so it's kind of, I feel like I can just create jewelry and I don't need to label it like whether it's for men or for women, like if it's a masculine style, traditionally what would be seen as a masculine style, and a woman feels more drawn to that. I think it's kind of appropriate for whatever sex to wear, whatever jewelry they want. And I think as well, like the kind of earlier part of your question, it's interesting because I think we need to kind of like step back and look at who kind of dictates, who defines what luxury jewelry should look like. I think it's seen through quite like a narrow scope. And I just think there's a very large kind of genre of jewelry which is outside of the mainstream that doesn't really get much recognition from mainstream jewelry. And I think it's just time to kind of like reevaluate the definitions of luxury jewelry.
Conversation. But I think it's interesting, I think, almost in a way, the different spaces that are opening up for jewelry and precious metals, and like you said, like kind of operating outside like kind of this preconceived like kind of notions or areas in regards to that. I know Vania is probably experiencing similar things with the high jewelry space and challenging those kind of established norms, I guess you could say. So there's a lot of things we're going to come back to, but I just want to kind of go through everyone to start with, so introduce everyone to our audience. So I'd like to kind of go on to Shivani. Shivani, are you there? You ready? So Shivani, you've kind of previously articulated this idea of no longer feeling the pressure to compartmentalize different aspects of your reality in terms of culture and heritage. So of challenging this assumption of culture being for the home life per se, for certain groups here in the UK, and of culture and work being somehow mutually exclusive. And this is definitely something that I know a lot of you can have something to say about, and we kind of touched on it in our conversation, so I think we'll probably come back to this. But to tie back to what Vania was talking about, authenticity, I want to come back to you with this question about authenticity, Shivani, and to talk to you about how you're seeking to fold back heritage, culture, and roots through where you are with your practice now, and how you communicate about your practice.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and I kind of took a step back from the more public-facing part of my work about almost a year ago now, because I felt like I needed to be able to express a more authentic side of myself, which I felt I didn't really feel like I had ever done before, and I didn't feel there was space to do that before. And I think over lockdown, it's given me a lot of time to be able to address a lot of these things that I'd been thinking about. So in relation to culture and heritage, I've been really trying to think about how, looking at my work, you don't necessarily relate it to my culture, my Indian culture, but it's there within me, and I've been thinking about how I can use this, use my culture and use this kind of story to represent my work. So I've been thinking about, I'm doing a photo shoot, it's actually happening next week, and so the photo shoot will be bringing in different aspects of my culture, and I'm basically using it as a form of visual storytelling, which is another thing that I would love to do, and it's just another creative form which I think would be really interesting to pair alongside with my work. And it kind of works with marketing is something also that I've not really I've never really put myself forward in this way before, and I'm still not necessarily going to be the public face of my work, but I just felt like this was a way to tell a story that other people could relate to. And I think it's really important for, like you were saying before, you know, if there's no one that's come before you that other people coming after you can relate to or can look up to, then I think it's just constantly leaving out other people and making it's forming barriers for new people to be able to come into the space. And I think it's really important to open that up. So hopefully this will be a way to do that.
Yeah, and I think naturally sometimes in the way we work, we kind of put our work in front of us. Do you know what I mean? We kind of like, in a way, we want the work to speak for itself, and we don't always want to necessarily be like in front of the work, because we want the work to kind of hold its own. But I think sometimes when we do that, in particular within certain circumstances, like socially and what's happening kind of with the world, it means that we kind of remove ourselves to some extent from the conversation, or from the kind of awareness of what's happening. And sometimes it's not in our control, and we'd like to be, more featured or more prominent. And other times, but the nature of how we are with our practice is some of us are a bit shy. We're not always wanting to be out in front, talking about our stuff. We just kind of want to have our work out there and have people engage with the work. So, but it's nice in a way when you start to think about kind of tangible ways that you can kind of come out in front and kind of pull people into elements of yourself that maybe you haven't really talked about before, you haven't really been explicit about. And that's why it was interesting with Ryan as well, when his decision to kind of be very, and Vania and Ndidi, you guys are out there kind of out in front. So some of the rest of us are catching up with that. So I was wondering if Ndidi or Vania had anything to add in regards to this idea of of kind of culture and heritage, and how it's often compartmentalized. You know, you've been quite explicit with it, Vania, in terms of your design kind of language, in terms of how you talk about your collections and your pieces. I know Ndidi, it's something that informs your work. Maybe you talk about it sometimes, but maybe not as kind of readily open about it. But I think all of us, even if our work isn't explicitly about our experiences and about those elements of ourselves, it does come through in our approach, I think, in different ways. Would you not agree?
Should I say something?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think with my work and with whatever I do in life, you know, I was raised by two strong women, my grandmother and my mom, is to be very proud and to be very proud of who you are and where you come from. And my grandmother used to say something very profoundly, you know, intense, which is, for you to be free, you have to be deeply rooted. So, and when I decided to use my heritage, you know, I come from a small country in West Africa, which is a mosaic of ethnicities and languages and cultures, you know, and it is so vast. So I have that as an inspiration, you know, in cloth, in houses, in traditional way of living. So why not use that and transform into something that is combined with art? You know, it's a form of art. And to bring myself into, you know, and I'm proudly African, so everything I do, you know, I bring it into my daily life, into my work, into my personal life. So that's one thing that moves me, and also, you know, and people know me for. But to bring myself into the forefront of my business at the beginning, if anyone been following me, because I was a model for a few years, just because if you grew up in Africa and study in Lisbon, you have the opportunity to travel to London, Paris, New York, and all these places, you take it. So I think I was driven by the opportunity to travel. I come from humble background, so that gave me an opportunity to travel and meet people and enrich my world. And even though I already had a very rich world traveling across, you know, 15 countries in Africa growing up, you know, going there for holidays. So to bring myself to the forefront of my company, in the beginning, I was very reluctant because I didn't want people to associate, oh my God, she just came into the jewelry scene, you know, and she's a model, who is funding her? She wants to promote herself. It's not about promoting myself. I'm a very smart and hardworking woman, and I create beautiful jewelry. And I wanted, you know, I have a creativity and I do beautiful things. So I stepped back a bit, and then I just let my, you know, I hire models to wear my jewelry. And I just wanted to amplify where the heritage of the brand comes from, where it's going to go, what is my main mission. Yes, I want to sell jewelry, I want to be commercial, but also I don't want to sell my soul. I want to honor all these countries where the gemstones come from. So it took us about 2 years ago when I started coming more prominently into our Instagram feeds and bringing myself out to the brand. But I wanted to, you know, amplify the voice first and then come after, not because I wanted to hide myself. I just wanted to make sure that people took my work seriously, thinking that it's not difficult, it's very difficult to have a fine jewelry business. It's a business that requires a lot of funding. I was very lucky the way I started my business. I was loaned diamond from, because I worked for all these brands. I knew all the suppliers. I knew everybody, all the suppliers. I went to all the fairs. So when I needed to set up my business, and I always work very hard. So all these people that I interact with business-wise knew me. When I needed, I said, I have no capital to start my business, but I have a workshop is willing to make my jewelry, and I just need your diamonds. Would you, you know, give them a memo? I was very lucky. And I sold. I was all my pieces. I was very lucky. And then I started coming into you know, he was a journey. As you said, I set up in 2011. Only by 2015, we really got this momentum that the business, you know, we're still struggling, we're still building, but anyway.
I think right now it's difficult, like with no one really knows what's going on with the world in some regards. But I think this idea of, it's interesting because you kind of led me onto this question I was gonna talk about, what I wanted to open up to everyone. And that's this idea of persistence. You know, I think this is something that's true for all of us on this panel, in regards to kind of like thinking outside the box in terms of how they position themselves and how they grew their business. Also in terms of like, maybe there's been times where the opportunity that you wanted hasn't presented itself or hasn't been easy, and I know some of us have applied to things over and over again before we got into them, or sent applications over and over again. And this is what I've come across in terms of researching for this talk. But so that these experiences resonated with me, and I know from what you just said, Vania, and what I know about you before, and also Shivani and others on the panel. But I think this idea about this like kind of drive to succeed and persistence to kind of position ourselves where we think we need our practices to go, our business to go. And I think this kind of idea about this drive to succeed and this persistence and this idea of continual improvement and change is particularly relevant for those of us on this panel. And I think in a way, if you're positioned in a place in society where you don't necessarily feel safe or comfortable all the time in terms of your position within your industry, I think it makes you be very kind of like, very, agile, you know, very like kind of very, very much wanting to continue to improve, very much like being innovative. I think it's like a quality that it lends itself to, comes out of our experience of having to kind of navigate different places and negotiate our space and our journeys. I just wanted to know if anyone else on the panel wanted to talk a bit towards that, or felt that it resonated with them.
I think for me, I think I was always out there. I wasn't shy, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Really, you know, a lot of people, you know, talking about African background, my family were always, everybody was talking at the same time. So you had
to be assertive to get
to be assertive and get in there. Otherwise, you didn't get. You know,
yeah.
My
family is similar.
or things like that. So I think I was always out there, and probably my friends would probably tell me oh, Ndidi, please, you know, the passion and the wanting to show what I was doing was just like, I didn't think about what people thought of the work. I just actually made it, and you know, wanted to hear what people thought of the work. And it was always like that. I tell you, as an older person, I am definitely more shy now than I was then. But give me a chance, give me an audience, and I'll be out there. That was the thing. So I don't know if anybody else felt like that. You know.
How about Shivani? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's more to do with if you're in a space where you don't feel like there is necessarily room for you, there's constantly a feeling of having to prove your worth slightly. And also I think
you don't sit on your laurels, as it were.
Yeah, and it's just about challenging yourself. And you know, I've always wanted to learn more, grow more, evolve my work, and never really stand still. You know, I think it's just about trying to constantly better yourself, I think.
Yeah. Ryan or Shola, did you have anything?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I can relate to that completely. I mean, my background is bespoke jewelry, so everything that I've ever done has been one-off. It's been to someone else's specification. So when I decided that, you know, I want to get involved with what everyone else is doing, I want to create collections, I want to put my stamp on something and sell it to the masses. I don't want to always just do one-off pieces.
Have time to develop like kind of a style, or develop a certain thing, or even get a chance to explore something from more than one piece, because often it takes a couple of pieces to really figure out something if you're looking at exploring it.
Because I mean, when I do design with clients, I do kind of steer them towards my style to a degree, but I want to create collections and ranges that people can just, you know, ready-made pieces buy. So yeah, but it's all new to me. I feel a little bit out of place, like Shivani just said. I'm not found my feet yet.
Not quite your comfort zone.
Not exactly, no.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
Yeah, exactly. One foot in front of the other, I think.
That's it.
And Shola, how do you? Well, actually, there's some. I mean, you could talk about this, Shola, but there's I actually was going to go on to. So you might want to think about this as part of it, because you mentioned this in your earlier in your talk about this whole side of the jewelry space that isn't really kind of in the mainstream. So if you want to answer about this, go ahead. But I can also bring up that other question, depending on what you want to talk about.
Yeah, well, in terms of the previous question, I think with me, I'm quite new in terms of jewelry, so I'm still establishing myself to an extent. So in terms of like fully putting myself out there, I'm kind of trying to be a bit more slow moving with it until I've kind of really established the kind of set style for me, because I'm kind of like learning on the job, as I've only been doing it for a few years. But yeah, to go on to your other question.
Yeah, did you want me to kind of to preface it for you?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Yeah. So so what Shola was alluding to earlier was something that's actually come up in conversation with him as well as with Ryan, and I thought it would be an interesting thing to bring up here in our discussion before we kind of go on to some audience questions. And that's this thoughts on how the fine jewelry element of Black jewelry culture is quite apart from this mainstream fine jewelry, high jewelry space positioning, even though the value and the level of craftsmanship in the pieces is on a par. So this is one element of it. Then another element of this question, which maybe Vania would like to speak to as well, is to do with purchasing power and to do with like kind of maybe not always the black jewelry or the person of color jewelry market isn't always, as a consumer, isn't always kind of front and center in terms of what jewelry and silver and everything's marketed to. But we all know that people of color buy like items for their home and buy beautiful pieces of jewelry. So they're kind of tied together. So I'm adding the other bit at the end because I think people will come in on different elements of it regards to their experiences. But I'd like Shola or Ryan to start. You can start first, Shola, with this idea about how we might bridge the gap you think that's happening in jewelry with these kind of both at high kind of levels of craftsmanship and value, but they're kind of operating almost in silos.
Yeah, they seem like very independent. I think with the kind of mainstream jewelry industry, there probably are kind of gatekeepers, for lack of a better word, who they might not necessarily find the aesthetics of that kind of genre of jewelry to be appealing. So it's not necessarily something that they want to champion or bring to the mainstream.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it is undeniable that it's a huge
I think many of us on this
portion of the jewelry industry. And I feel like from what I see, like the people who are spending the most money on jewelry, it's more like that kind of aesthetic that I personally come into contact with.
Yeah.
But in terms of like bridging the gap, I don't really know like how that should look or how that would happen. But I think there should be a kind of acknowledgement from the mainstream industry of that and kind of try and open up a dialogue between maybe some of the designers that are working more in that world and maybe showcase some of their work, because regardless whether you think it's like tasteful or nice, I mean, it is impressive. And like for me personally, I don't find like a diamond tiara or something like that to be something that I personally think is beautiful. And I think something like that is comparable in terms of the materials it's used and the quality. So I don't think there's a reason why it shouldn't be kind of displayed and looked at. And also it's just kind of, it's very now, and it's kind of a time capsule of popular culture, and it's important to like keep track of what culturally what's happening. So Ryan,
do you have any, or anyone else? right?
Yeah, no, I agree with all of what Shola just said. But yeah. I think one of the main reasons is to do with the disparity between the amount of big high-end jewelry companies that are Black-owned and those that aren't, basically. Yeah. Like you say, there's certainly no.
No, Vania's changing that.
Well, exactly. Vania's a great example of
trailblazing in that space. Yeah.
She's at the forefront of exactly that. So yeah.
But yeah, I think I wanted to mention that because I think you and I and a few people on this panel will have worked on some of these pieces that are, value-wise quite like, high level value, but maybe don't reach the same kind of, we've seen the level of craftsmanship, we've seen like the intricacy and the, design, all these things involved, but, for some reason, it's not quite in the same space as some of these other pieces. It's quite interesting to see them kind of, how they kind of branch off. So I just thought it would be something to note. And I, like I said, I think it ties in as well to perceptions around who purchases jewelry at certain price points. And I was wondering if anyone else on the panel, and I'm also extending this to luxury precious metal items for the home. Ndidi, you've worked not just in silver, but in gold pieces for the home. So, we're talking about stuff that's like high value. Is there anybody else want to kind of feedback on that before we turn over to looking at some questions from the audience? No? Okay.
Well, just talking about luxury, the people who buy the silverware, they do actually use the items and stuff. So, they can display it and use it. So some people, they save money, they save and, watch for a long time before they'll buy a piece of silverware as well. So you get all sorts of different people coming.
That's the thing, perception, yeah.
Yeah. So, people have budgets or whatever it is, or special occasions and things like that. So, yeah.
And this ties back to a little bit as well, kind of what we talked with Shola earlier on, which was to do with like this democratization of luxury and who has access to it, who's, our perceptions around who's buying these pieces and who's enjoying these pieces. So I think at this point, it's probably a good time for us to look at I think Harriet might help me to look at the Q&A, see if there's anything there. If not, I can also, there's some other questions I've got as well.
We've got a couple of questions here, yeah. So the first one is just about making and, wondering whether any of you are using CAD design over hand drawn and, whether the use of sort of mechanical ways of making rather than hand making is being used by you. So whether, what you're using.
I'll answer it first. I'm sure others will have things to say. I use both. So predominantly I still do most things by hand. So predominantly I'm designing with by hand and sketching. I'm rendering or painting up like final paintings like with paints and gouache by hand, and then I'm fabricating by hand either directly in metal or wax carving, which is then cast by lost wax casting. But depending on the piece, sometimes I will also use CAD-CAM methods. So what I'll do is I might provide a technical drawing to someone who will then do the CAD work for me. And then we'll check through various iterations of it before it goes on to be computer generated through, usually for me it's wax printing, but some people use other methods. So depending on the complexity of the design or what I'm trying to achieve, sometimes I'll use a tool depending on the piece and what's best suited to that particular piece. So I'm not sure about anyone else on the panel.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm quite traditional in my style. So for many years, I've turned my back on CAD and I've not wanted to get involved with it. But you can't deny what it allows you to do. So there's certain jobs, if it's going to take me so long to hand make and to hand sketch and the rest of it, that I will turn to CAD, but it's a very small percentage.
Yeah, same here.
If I can hand draw and hand make, I always will.
Yeah, I use a mixture of both as well. I think as well, like when you're doing collections with CAD, it kind of gives you the opportunity to offer a lot more sizing. That's like scalable sizing rather than resizing each piece and throwing off the scale of the piece. Yeah, it depends on the style of the piece. I'll use a mixture of hand carved and also 3D printed stuff.
Like if you're going it, like you're saying, if you're doing small batch production or you're doing something where you need to have a certain amount of them, sometimes it helps if you're doing it through CAD. Anyone else know? Any other questions?
We use both.
Both. Yeah.
I would actually say we use 50-50 hand. The collection pieces, because it's a collection, we use CAD. It's just more cost effective. The bespoke pieces are one of a kind. Our high-end jewelry is done by hand. But for me, being a goldsmith, it's very important to know the costs, how the metal costs and the diamond count and everything, so I can plan my collection and my budget. Because that, for me, is where most of my resources are stuck in the collections. So we need to plan it very carefully, and CAD gives me that opportunity to at least get to 90% of my costs, so I can plan.
Thank you. I've got two questions which I think I can sort of put into one. Do you think the cost of materials is prohibitive, particularly to people of colour? And how can we help people enter the industry? Which also sort of ties in with what one thing can the industry do to improve representation of people of colour in the craft and trade in the UK today?
I think, I'll start with that and then anyone else can. I think what Vania alluded to with the diamond sourcing and stuff, I would say I had it's very difficult. And I was also, when I very, very early started out, I was doing bespoke when I wanted to do my own kind of collections after moving from doing more bespoke work, because I had built up this kind of connection with suppliers. Like I was very lucky in some of my very early pieces, like my diamond set pieces. I had a similar arrangement where I had people loan me diamonds. Like, for example, the first time I showed at the fair, I'll just say this, I don't mind. They said they were so excited that I was going in it. They said, look, we will loan you the diamonds to do your pieces. And if you don't sell them, you can take apart the pieces and give us the diamonds back, or you can pay on, over time. And I didn't want to take apart my pieces for the pieces I didn't sell. So they allowed me to have a payment plan to pay them over time, like for the pieces. And this is really a hard thing to do. And I only had maybe one supplier who did that. And then over time built up other suppliers who would allow me to do that with more with diamonds. I haven't really had that experience with colored stones as much, but it depends on experience. But I think if we could get more supplier, and I was just lucky that I had people who really believed in what I wanted to do, that were behind me in that. And I think if we can get more people on board to help people who don't necessarily have massive capital startups or have come from backgrounds where they can fund these things out of the gates, whether it's gemstones or whether it's precious metals, for if you get if you get into a prestigious exhibition and you want to get the silver or want to get the gold to raise a beautiful vessel, to have people, whether it's suppliers, sponsor you. I think that would be great if we can set up more of those kinds of support systems. That way it just helps to kind of, and I know it's hard and people say, oh, well, this other person might have managed to get funding or investment, but it's very difficult to get that. And if we had people step up with the materials to start with, let alone just funding maybe to help fund collections, that would be amazing and excellent.
Can I just add something to that? Because I think it's not only people lending us the material, because in my case, like yours, Melanie, we had, all I said, you have to put in the time and the work. You have to work for someone else. You have to, even if you start at shop floor and work your way up, when I wanted to work in industry, you realize it's so generational and family work with family. And for you to have a job in jewelry industry, unless you're a salesperson, you don't get to the background. So perhaps start there and then work your way through. And then, this is how I did. I was lucky when I started working for Graph Diamonds. They gave me straight away a good job inside the company. This was 2004, 2005, was still very smaller than it is today. So you just have to go in with you can do all attitude, from taking photocopies, selling, cleaning the windows. I'm the first to arrive, the last to leave, work Saturdays, didn't take holidays. The HR has to come in and say, Vania, in this country, you have to take your holidays. You know what I mean? You cannot work 12 months straight. But, and then by the time I did 10 years in working for all these 3 brands, I was able to approach one of the suppliers who knew me. So I think coming from nowhere and ask for a supplier to give you something on memo, it's a bit, you have to build your reputation with the industry first. And how do we have like John Smith, who doesn't have any link to the industry, perhaps more GIA, I did it, but I don't think it helped me much. But I think other schools where the goldsmith can, try to target, try to advertise in more areas, and perhaps like seeing more people of color in the industry, like myself, you, Ryan, Shola, and Ndidi, and Shivani, and they could be inspired.
Yeah,
because it probably. Otherwise, it's just gonna be, you can't just wait for people to give you materials without building your reputation, your presence within the industry.
I think as well for time with Ndidi, and like I know for you, Ndidi, like a piece, not just the cost of the metal for you, but to do a piece of silver, there's so many hours involved, right? So it's like also how do you fund while you're, and you might wait for a longer time for a buyer of a piece of silver than, for example,
there's always an overlap. So it is a case of planning ahead and thinking about what you're going to do next. I mean, at the beginning, I was working, part-time and full-time and whatever, doing other things, and then working in my spare time. And as time went on, it changed. But if you want to make anything, you got to grab those pennies together and make those pieces, and then get them seen so that people can access them and stuff, and tell you what they think or buy them and things like that. That's the way I see it. It's about planning and when I'm teaching, a lot of the time we use copper, so we can make you
work on the forms,
work on the skills to make these things and stuff, and that's the way to at least access it if you can't afford the silver, especially if it's a big piece and things like that.
I mean, I think as the second part of the question, I think part of it is like we're talking about now, tangible ways, but I think a lot of it as well is support when it comes to access into education, when it comes to support while people are doing internships or while they're doing these jobs or while they're training. So I think what we talked about now is kind of what you do once you're in the place where you're doing it. But I think there also needs to be some support as people enter the space, as well, so that they're, in a way, they're supported to some extent as they're trying to like forge these links, whether it's through, and I think one of the things I know that I'm really passionate about is paid internships or paid mentorships, because a lot of us have worked other jobs, or if you're lucky, you get a job within the industry. But a lot of these internships or mentorship programs, which would be great, are, they're not necessarily paid, or they're only paid expenses. So only people who can really afford to like have that time end up getting those spaces. And then it's kind of like, so I think to some extent it could be good if there was some kind of intervention to some extent to help to make sure to field more people kind of getting access to these opportunities where we can, as you say, prove ourselves in terms of our work ethic and our kind of drive to succeed. Anyone else have anyone? I don't know if Shivani had anything to say about that, or anyone else, because we're going to have to probably. Harriet, what do you think? Maybe one more question and then wrap up?
Well, it's kind of on the same sort of tack, really. But other than being more visible within the industry, do you think there are other ways that we could, and I think this we're talking about sort of before anybody even gets to the industry, is that, you know, how do we inspire young people of colour to be interested in becoming part of the industry, you know, other than just, you know, being more visible? Do you think there are other things that we could be doing?
I mean, it does also tie into, like, there's so many different ways you can be engaged in the jewelry industry or in silversmithing. I mean, and I think with silversmithing, maybe more so, it tends to be your own practice more, maybe, but there's other elements, whether it's to do with like polishing or other elements of it, maybe, but it tends to be very solely kind of, it's a very holistic practice, isn't it? Whereas jewelry kind of,
I don't know. I mean, at the beginning, for me, when I was out there a lot more, you know, doing the demonstrations and going into museums and libraries, you know, people did actually see me making, and that inspired them enough to go and find a course or find something so that they could access it. So, I mean, obviously things are a little bit different now, you know, there's not as many, but I still occasionally get asked to do workshops and things like that. And if me as a Black person is there making with hands, talking to the community, you know, talking
and
to
also a woman silversmith as well. You know, people see you wielding a hammer and, like, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, I mean, the internet is the thing now, and if I'm brave enough, you know, I'll probably try and get a few videos of me actually making.
I think you should. That would be great. Please do.
You know, and stuff like that. I mean, it is a little bit new to me, the video thing and stuff like that. So, but that is a direct way to show young people what can be done.
And what's involved,
And then, you know, if I'm not shy enough to let them into the workshop and see the messiness of the making and actually the hard work, because it's not that easy, you know, to make things. So. I don't know. So they have to want it.
I think that's as well part of it is like people understanding like what's involved and understanding what the potential is. And I think that, like what Vania alluded to earlier, I think when it comes to jewelry, it tended to be until very recently quite an insider thing. Like people found out about it maybe because they learned about it through someone they knew or someone in their family, and then they ended up kind of exploring it further. You didn't tend to have too many people that kind of came to it like kind of randomly, at least coming into it early on, like from the right from the training side of things. You do get people who are interested in doing jewelry and maybe come to it later on. But I think it's interesting to look at all those gaps and how we start to filter people in and have them understand like what's involved in these different kind of trades and different elements of what we're doing. I mean, like you said, like even with it technique wise, like, you know, you're using a couple of specialist techniques for you as a silversmith, but that's just like a tip of the iceberg in terms of what's like, you know, possible when it comes to discipline.
Definitely, without a doubt. You know, I only do a little section of it, so, you know, people have to be interested though to start off with to see what can be done and things like that. So I don't know if anybody else feels that way.
Yeah, but it would be great. You see much more stuff about maybe ceramics or other fields that you don't see as much like educational material happening about like jewelry or silversmithing that's widely disseminated. So maybe that's one of the things we should look at.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think, you know, as soon as people get into workshops and are able to see the actual making in process, they're fascinated and astounded, you know, quite frankly. And I think it's a really good tool, not to just get people into the industry, but for sales as well. People suddenly go, oh, that's why it costs that much,
and
or
they understand.
that's how much work goes into it. Exactly. I really don't want to sort of.
I think we have to.
I am going to have to. There are a couple more questions, but I'll probably send these out to you guys, and we can sort of continue a conversation. But I mean, you know, thank you all so much for your time this evening. And I think, you know, really what we've done and what you guys have done is really highlight, you know, the importance of putting the spotlight on, you know, jewelers and silversmiths from BAME backgrounds. You know, we've got to inspire younger makers into the industry, younger people to be interested. So thank you, Melanie, for bringing this fabulous together.
You said my thank you interesting. I think you pretty much covered it actually.
Oh, well.
but you've covered pretty much everything. But I just wanted to say that that one of the silver linings of this time that we're in right now, although it's been challenging for many of us from these backgrounds, is that it's fostered this greater connection and network amongst those of us of color working in precious metals. And that's something I'm really thankful for, and I'm really grateful for. And it's something that has really fed me a lot and kind of nourished me a lot in this time. And as you said, I'm not going to repeat the other stuff, but that, as you said, you know, it's really important that we look at how we continue to foster diversity in this space, and more people from their backgrounds entering and excelling in this space. Yeah.
Thank you. We did have one last sort of a comment question that people want to see the slideshow again. So what we're going to do, I'll say good night. Thank you very much again. And I'm going to ask Hugh to put the slideshow on again so that we can have a look at all of your work as we close. But thank you all, and have a good evening.
Thanks very much.